My Hero Academia has gotten its fair share of spin-off movies, releasing 4 different theatrical films. And with the series' final season on the horizon, I thought it would be a good idea to take an in-depth look into each of these 4 movies. The good, the bad, and the really bad. And with that, I watched every My Hero Academia movie. The very first film in the franchise was My Hero Academia 2 Heroes. It was initially revealed in December 2017 and would release the following year in August 2018 in Japan and in September 2018 in America. It was originally slated to only screen in America from September 25th to October 2nd, but was extended for an additional 2 days due to its surprising success. It grossed over $14 million in Japan alone, with a worldwide total of $33 million. While that may not seem like a large number in comparison to some other films, it still exceeded expectations, especially in the US market. Ratings-wise, it also performed well, but looking back on it now using review sites like IMDb and Letterboxd, it tells a different story, with average ratings of 7.3 out of 10 and 3.3 out of 5 respectively. And I honestly fall on the lower end of those ratings. 2 Heroes isn't awful per se, but let's just say it has a lot of room for improvement. 2 Heroes released after Season 3 of the anime had started airing, but actually takes place in between Season 2 and Season 3, specifically after the final exam arc, but before the forest training arc. The plot here follows the main cast as they attend a convention at Island, a moving community full of scientists developing advanced support items for heroes. While there, All Might runs into a friend from his past, but a group of villains hijack the convention, taking All Might and the other attending heroes as hostages, leaving Class A as the only ones available to rescue them. Or in other words, it's basically just Paul Blart, or I guess something like Die Hard. What I really like about this plot is getting to learn more about All Might's past. In addition to the villains, there are a couple of original characters, namely David Shield and his daughter Melissa. David is a longtime friend of All Might and the designer of his costumes and a brilliant scientist. My Hero Academia's mangaka Horikoshi even said that he was using this film as an opportunity to expand on All Might's past, as he didn't have room for it in the main narrative. While he didn't write this film's script himself, he had a large involvement in it, even designing all of the original characters. But enough dicking around here. Let's get into the real nitty-gritty details here, because I've got a lot to say, and most of it isn't very good. We open with a prologue showing All Might in action during his time spent in America. I really like this inclusion. We get to see some cool American heroes and some pretty well animated action sequences. We also get introduced to David Shield and his relationship with All Might. There are even some subtle details like how All Might named one of his moves after David's home state. Then All Might wakes up, revealing that he was dreaming about his past. And then I fall asleep, dreaming of a better movie. We're on a plane with Deku and All Might as they land at Island, and we're also confronted with one of the issues I have with these movies. It's that they try way too hard to dump a ton of exposition on the audience. There are 2 different categories of exposition revealed here. There's details about the movie original settings and characters, and details about the parent series. Let's start with the movie original details. Deku starts off by pointing out Island and saying, and I quote, "The floating city that can move anywhere. Home to over 10,000 scientists, Island." Why did he say this? Well, he said it so that the audience could learn about Island, but this was just clunky dialogue for no good reason. A few minutes later, Deku and All Might land on the island, and as they're entering, there's an intercom detailing information about the island, which makes perfect sense. Why not reserve the details about the island to this intercom? They're arriving at an airport, so of course there's going to be information about their destination there. It's perfectly natural, unlike Deku's forced comments. My other problem with the exposition is that we get a 3-minute long unbroken montage summarizing a number of large events from season 1 and 2 of the anime. Now look, I get it. Some people, don't ask me why, would watch this film without watching the anime first, but there are much more subtle ways to reveal important background information than just ranting directly to us. For example, at one point in the film, All Might explains to Deku how he hasn't told David about One For All. This is natural and is a perfect way to get across the concept of One For All without directly telling the audience what it is. And that concludes my rant. So let's get back to the actual plot. We're introduced to Melissa Shield, David's daughter, who then shows us around the convention and the number of support items on display. I thought that all of these could be cool set pieces that could appear later in the film. Maybe the students have to use these support items to fight against the villains. These displays and support items never come up again. At all. While Melissa takes Deku through the convention, All Might meets up with David and reveals his true form to him. David is visibly distraught about the state All Might is in. Subtle foreshadowing? Back at the convention with Deku, somehow every important Class A character just happens to be there too. Bakugo, Kirishima, Todoroki, Ida, Kaminari, Mineta, Jiro, Yaoyorozu, and Uraraka just somehow happened to be at the convention. The rest of the class is also on the island, but couldn't get access to the expo because it's in an early access period. They give us some believable reasons that everyone is here, like Todoroki is representing Endeavor, Yaoyorozu's parents own stock in a company, but it just seems very convenient that they all just happen to be here. It would have made much more sense to me if they were all here because it was a UA field trip. It is the most prestigious hero school in Japan, so it would make sense that they get invited out to a support hero convention. Anyways, after they meet up, everyone agrees to see each other again at a reception for the expo. After splitting up, Melissa gives Deku a device that she happened to have created called the Full Gauntlet, which can withstand the full force of 3 of All Might's punches. That's a little convenient. I sure do wonder if that'll come in handy later. Before moving on to Act 2, David hits us with a flashback to when he first met All Might, as well as when All Might shared his dream to David about becoming a symbol of peace. Subtle foreshadowing? The kids meet up outside the reception as they wait for Bakugo and Kirishima to show up. Inside the reception, however, a group of villains attack, restraining the pro heroes, including All Might, and setting the whole building on lockdown. This means that Deku and his class are the only ones capable of saving the pro heroes, but in order to do so, they must break into the security room and turn off the system. They have a whole conversation about whether they should act or not, because they're only students, not pro heroes. This moment is a little weird to me because it harkens back to those moments in season 2 and 3 when they went out to save Ida and Bakugo. They decide that they'll act without fighting the villains, just attempting to sneak by and deactivate the security system. However, they do end up fighting the villains, but never get reprimanded for acting without a license. Even though in season 3 they were scolded for saving Bakugo, and in season 2 they're even scolded for saving Ida from Stain. It's not a big deal, it just really takes you out when it's been established previously that actions like these have consequences. As the kids make their way to the security room, the top of the tower they're in, they come across a pair of villains. They attempt to hide, but suddenly Bakugo and Kirishima show up who begin fighting them. Todoroki stays behind with them while the rest escape. Of course, we need to get the 3 best fighters in the class to stay busy with some fodder opponents. As they make their way up, they come across more fodder in the form of security robots. There's some action here, but none of it is interesting in the slightest because it's literally just fighting faceless drones. Deku, Melissa, and Uraraka continue ahead, while the rest of the class stays behind to keep the drones busy. Uraraka uses her quirk to send Deku and Melissa up to the top of the tower, and she's about to get swarmed by robots when Bakugo and Todoroki show up to save her. 2 points on this. 1, it's really funny how they act like something bad could actually happen here when this is, you know, a spin-off movie and we know she's gonna be fine. It reminds me of that Chewbacca fake out death in Solo. And 2, I really hope it doesn't become a trend that the class gets purposefully split up to fight worthless villains like an army of robots. As Deku and Melissa reach the top, Deku must face off against my favorite original character, Swordkill. Can you guess what he does? As Deku and Melissa find their way into the security room, they find out the twist villain of this movie, David and his assistant Sam. Essentially, David had been working on a device that can enhance a quirk's capability. He knew All Might's quirk was fading, but didn't want to live in a world without a symbol of peace. However, this device was locked away by David's superiors as it was deemed too dangerous, so he and Sam orchestrated a fake villain attack to use as cover so he could break in and steal the device back. This twist is kind of obvious because, like, who else could it have been? And we'd all have that foreshadowing with David before, but honestly, I like his motivation here. We have to ask the question, how far is he willing to go to protect the idea of a symbol of peace? But you know what's really funny? The twist after this one. It turns out that David tried to hire actors to act as villains, but the villain actors he hired were actual villains who were actually attacking the island and were trying to steal the quirk amplifier. And it turns out his assistant Sam knew and was planning to hand over the device all along. But what doesn't make sense here is that Sam's reasoning is that he wanted fame and fortune from the device, but like, how's he supposed to get fame if he's literally working with a villain? How can you be a respected scientist when you hand over a dangerous weapon to a literal villain? Anyways, the villain, oh yeah, his name's Wolfram by the way, tries to shoot Sam, but David jumps in to take the shot for him. Wolfram kidnaps David in order to force him to create more devices so he can sell them as Deku chases after them. In the meantime, Melissa unlocks the security and frees the heroes as Deku has this crazy ass fight scene with Wolfram. Like dude, this actually like goes hard. They take off in a helicopter, Deku chases after them but ultimately falls. As he picks himself back up, he ain't even mad about being hurt. He's mad about failing to save David. He sits up yelling into the sky just as All Might comes by and crashes through the helicopter, blowing it up, killing the pilots, and saving David. Then we get this hilarious, yet awesome final battle with Deku and All Might fighting side by side against a superpowered Wolfram. But man, can I just say, Wolfram is a lame ass villain, so his whole motivation is just that he wants to sell the quirk device for money. He has like no personality, his character design is really weird, like there's supposed to be a black shadow on his face, and the only mildly interesting thing about him is that All For One helped him out, because All For One wanted to with All Might by having his best friend turn to villainy. That's a pretty cool mind game and it has absolutely nothing to do with Wolfram. What you're really here 4 is the final battle. Some of the class comes back to help out a little, which is nice, with these crazy running cycles for seemingly no reason besides the fact they're just cool as and we end on this cool moment where David envisions Deku as All Might, finally coming to terms with the fact that All Might won't last forever, but there are new heroes to take on the mantle.
And then it just ends.
We do get a little closure with a post-credit scene. David is in the hospital being watched by the police, presumably in their custody. But let's see what this film did right and what it did wrong. My main issue with these spin-off, non-canon, well, we'll get to that, movies is that there are no stakes. We know the main cast will be perfectly fine because they show up in the main series, and there can be no lasting effects because these are non-canon, or were. Again, we'll get to that later. So the only tension here is with these side characters, which means we need some reason to care about these original characters, and I think in the case of David and Melissa Shield, they did a pretty good job. Since All Might and David go way back, All Might obviously cares for David and his daughter, and since we care about and identify with All Might, we're gonna care about David too. They also have clear motivations that are easy to understand. David is fearful of losing the symbol of peace, which is a sentiment that many characters in the series share. And Melissa wants to be the best scientist she can be, just like her father, which mirrors Deku's motivation to become the best hero he can be, just like All Might. When this movie goes wrong though is with the villain. We have no reason to care about this guy, his motivations are shallow, we know next to nothing about him, and he doesn't really feel all that intimidating. Like yeah, he restrained All Might earlier, but that was by using the building's security measures. It wasn't even with his own power. He's just boring. And his goons, like the appropriately named Sword Kill, are no better. I also don't like how the rest of the class gets so heavily sidelined. I get it, we need room for the original characters as well as the two main characters, Deku and All Might, but at that point, just don't include the rest of the class if they aren't going to contribute in any meaningful way. Like showing the entirety of Class A just on the island, reacting to the events unfolding, does nothing for the overall story. But what I can praise about this film is its animation. Sure, there are some dull action scenes here and there, but that final battle, man,
absolute cinema.
Now that we've gone over two heroes, let's see if the next film can improve upon its weak points.
It does.
The second My Hero Academia movie was Heroes Rising, released in Japan on December 20th, 2019, and in North America on February 26th, 2020. I actually got to see this one in theaters when it first came out and really enjoyed it. Lots of others did too, as it grossed over $30 million worldwide, just like the first film. However, it's garnered historically higher scores than the first film. Looking at review sites IMDb and Letterboxd, it received a 7.8 out of 10 and a 3.6 out of 5.
This jump in reception is a result of Horikoshi intentionally trying to make this film better than the first.
At the time of its initial announcement, it was revealed that this would be the final My Hero Academia film.
Well, if by final you meant that there'd be two more after it, then yeah, sure.
Horikoshi was going all out for this film. He was using ideas that he had for the original ending of the series, he wanted the story to be much more interesting overall, and he wanted the villains to be more intimidating and leave a heavier impression on the audience.
And I gotta say, he succeeded in everything he sought out to do. Heroes Rising is much more interesting than Two Heroes in terms of character and action, and also has this very grandiose feel to it, befitting of a series finale.
Heroes Rising was released in the midst of Season 4 airing, however it takes place after Season 4 and in the middle of Season 5. Specifically, it takes place after the My Villain Academia arc, but before the Endeavor Agency arc. It gets really confusing too because there's some inconsistencies in the details, such as Shigaraki's hair still being blue instead of white, but it doesn't really matter. The plot follows Class A as they have been stationed on a small island named Naboo Island. There they run their own hero agency, helping the townsfolk and getting real hero experience. However, a villain named Nine attacks, who has multiple quirks and is trying to steal the quirk of a boy from the island. The class, as only heroes available, must now step up and defeat him.
Now let's get into the real details here.
We open on this really well animated action sequence about a group of heroes trying to stop a League of Villains transport. The GOAT Endeavor is the one to finally bring it down, but as he reaches the now crashed truck, he finds an empty life support system, which is when we're introduced to our villain 9. Already, this guy and his crew are way cooler and better designed than Wolfram and his cronies, Wario and Waluigi. Afterwards, we get a recap montage.
Because of course we do.
Actually, this one isn't as bad as Two Heroes. It's pretty brief and stylized. Now, we arrive on Naboo Island, where Class A has set up their own hero agency as part of a plan from UA to not only fill vacant hero slots, but also give the students practical hero training. We get a nice montage of the students helping out the citizens.
I actually like this idea, and I think it does a much better job at having all these students naturally come together than the first film does.
Back on the island, we get introduced to two of our new original characters, brother and sister, Katsuma and Mahoro. Mahoro prank calls the hero agency multiple times in an attempt to show Katsuma that heroes can't be trusted, but as Deku bonds with Katsuma, we'll learn that she's only doing this to dissuade him from his dream of becoming a hero because she worries about the danger that comes along with it. However, in this really heartfelt scene, we see Katsuma and Deku bonding over their shared dream of becoming a hero, and instantly makes the audience, or at least me, care about these original characters. You can't help but root for Katsuma, and seeing the parallels between him and Deku only further builds his character. But at the same time, back on the mainland, Katsuma's father is attacked by Nine, who's in search of a cell
activation quirk to steal in order to fix his illness. But after stealing the quirk, he realizes that it's only compatible with a certain blood type. It seems all hope is lost until he realizes that Katsuma might have a quirk that will work with him. Before setting off for Naboo Island, 9 levels an entire city block with a giant lightning storm.
This guy has already done more cool shit in his first 2 appearances in this film than Wolfram did in the entirety of his film.
Back on the island, 9 and his buddies Chimera, Mummy, and Slice pull up and start wreaking havoc. The heroes leap into action, and we get some pretty cool fight scenes showcasing the villain's abilities. Unfortunately, the students are only able to take down Mummy, while Deku and Bakugo barely survive a run with 9, who is forced to retreat after his health starts acting up again. The heroes retreat too, and set up a temporary shelter where Katsuma helps heal the injured heroes with his quirk. We then learn of 9's backstory. He was always motivated to create a society where power is the deciding factor of one's fate. No heroes, no villains, and no labels. He recruited outcasts like Chimera to his crew and was so dedicated that he allowed All For One Tsujiko to experiment on him and give him a weaker version of All For One that can store up to 9 quirks. However, every time he uses his quirk, it only worsens his illness, which is why he needs the cell activation quirk from Katsuma.
It's not a new idea by any means, but it's much more believable and interesting than something as simple as, let's say, Wolfram just doing it for the money.
Back with the heroes, they discuss a plan to stop 9. Katsuma volunteers to give himself up to 9 since he's targeting his quirk, but Deku refuses. Bakugo agrees, saying the only way is to take down the villains. The class agrees and they come together to devise a plan where they'll lure the villains out to a remote, smaller island and split them up using the terrain to their advantage. The villains pull up, and according to their plan, the heroes split them up, with different groups of students taking on a different villain. I really like this. Every student actually contributes in a meaningful way and gets to face a real villain, unlike the first film, where the ones who actually did do anything just fought an army of faceless robots. This difference gives us some great fight scenes, such as Tokoyami and Ashido versus Slice, or Kirishima, Ida, Sue, and Todoroki versus Chimera. But the main fight here is Deku and Bakugo versus 9. They first get some support from the rest of the class, but eventually comes down to just them. They put up a good fight, with some really well choreographed action, but 9 ultimately unleashes his true power, which Deku and Bakugo are no match for.
This leads us to the moment, which is crazy hype, but also a giant ass pull.
In a shot reminiscent of the creation of Adam, Deku gives Bakugo One For All as he sees that the only way to defeat 9 is with the combined strength of 2 One For All users. This gives us some insane animation coupled with this beautiful soundtrack and some crazy emotional moments.
It's just so peak.
It ends with Deku saying goodbye to One For All in a scene that really feels like it could be the finale to the series, which makes sense since that was the original idea. But for all the emotional weight of that scene, it dissipates right after, as it turns out that actually the transfer process broke because Bakugo went unconscious and actually the previous One For All users wanted to stay with Deku, and actually Bakugo now has no memory of using One For All. Alright, now I get why they did this. They obviously can't have Deku lose One For All because, you know, the rest of the series has to happen, and they also can't have Bakugo remember this moment because this film isn't canon.
Or is it?
So originally, the My Hero Academia films were not canon until Horikoshi confirmed in an interview that they actually have been canon the entire time, which just brings up more questions than answers. This makes sense as some of the movie's original characters appear briefly in the manga, but you're telling me no one brings up the events of these movies ever again? Deku never brings up passing One For All to Bakugo, 9 is never mentioned again by anyone, the quirk amplifying device from 2 heroes isn't brought up again. Use some pretty major events, and just not bring them up again is a little weird. It takes away from the weight of these films. I'd almost prefer if they were non-canon, because then no one bringing them up again is a given. But since they are canon and are never brought up again, they feel insignificant because they've left no larger impact on the story.
While we're talking about the controversial canonicity of this film, let's talk about another of this film's controversies.
The animation of this film is no doubt spectacular. Even in scenes that are not the giant third act finale, the animation is still great, better than the main series and even better than in 2 Heroes, but this comes at a cost. Heroes Rising released while Season 4 was still airing, which means they would have been working on them at the same time.
You can probably see where I'm going with this.
Resources at Bones had to be put into the Heroes Rising film and taken away from the Season 4 anime, which meant it took a fairly noticeable hit in animation quality, and this trend will only continue in the future. But let's talk about positives here. It is most definitely a step up over 2 Heroes. The original characters are much better, Katsuma and Mahoro are very endearing, and their dynamic with Deku and Bakugo is really well written. The villains are also much better, with more fleshed out backstories, more interesting quirks, and cooler designs. The main cast is better represented too. All of the students get their moment to shine and contribute at least something to the final battle, which has this incredibly grand feel to it, which could very well be the series finale.
Horikoshi clearly locked in on this and made a much more complete and fuller experience that can really stand on its own. I sure hope they don't go and f things up with the next film. Subtle foreshadowing.
The third My Hero Academia movie was World Heroes Mission, released in Japan on August 6, 2021, and in North America on October 29th. This one actually performed better at the box office than both previous films, garnering over $47 million worldwide. But while Heroes Rising was able to receive better review scores than Two Heroes, World Heroes Mission drops back down, with a 7 out of 10 on IMDb and a 3.3 out of 5 on Letterboxd.
While this film does follow some of the positive trends of Heroes Rising, it also falls back onto some of the more negative trends from Two Heroes.
Before its release, this movie's marketing was really hyping up the fact that this film would be focused on Class A's Big Three, sporting new original costumes, accompanied with the tagline, "He will meet the Three Musketeers."
The costumes show up for 5 minutes and then never again, and I still have no idea who he is referring to.
I'm getting ahead of myself though. World Heroes Mission takes place around the end of Season 5, in the midst of the Endeavor Agency arc. The plot here is that a terrorist organization / cult is hell-bent on wiping out all Quark users as they fear the Quark Doomsday Theory. Deku, Bakugo, and Todoroki must team up to stop their evil plan. However, in the midst of all of this, Deku has been framed with murder.
Notice how that plot summary doesn't mention anything about a globe-trotting or worldwide adventure, even though the title is quite literally World Heroes Mission.
The film opens up introducing us to Humorize, a fanatical cult that worships the Quark Doomsday Theory and their leader, Flex Turn. The idea is that as generations pass, Quarks only get stronger and stronger, and that one day they'll become so powerful that they'll bring about the end of the world. To prevent this, the organization creates a trigger bomb, an explosive that releases a Quark-enhancing gas so potent that when exposed to it, Quark users lose control of their Quark and end up themselves. They release it into a city as a warning sign, and we see a number of citizens dying from the drug's effects. It's also pretty dark. One guy melts, another guy turns into a turtle and just dies.
Crazy stuff, man.
Humorize's goal with this bomb is to detonate them all around the world in order to wipe out all Quark users and leave only the Quarkless population surviving in order to save the human race. I actually really like this premise. The Quark Doomsday Theory was never fully explored in the anime and manga, presumably because it didn't fit in anywhere, so using the movie to shine some light on it is a great idea. I also think there are a lot of interesting ideas they could come up with when the heroes have to face an army of Quarkless villains.
Too bad this movie takes advantage of neither of those things.
We'll get back to that later. After Humorize's display of power, the World Heroes Association mobilizes a number of hero teams across the world, with some of these teams including the students of Class A. Now, why are they a part of these global level threats? Because it's during their work studies, which I guess it works. I do like seeing some of the new original hero designs though.
It's a shame they never actually do anything.
Our main focus is on Endeavor's squad with Deku, Bakugo, and Todoroki, all three of which are dripped out in these awesome new stealth suits. The whole squad dives out of the plane and attacks the Humorized base. It's a really cool scene. We end up with the heroes discovering that the bombs are missing from every base around the globe. Next we get an opening for some reason, which seems like the perfect spot for an exposition dump, but that doesn't happen.
It only took them 3 movies to realize that they don't have to lore dump the entire show in the beginning of their spin-off movies.
Next, we're introduced to our brand new original character, Rhodey, who has been hired to acquire a case of stolen jewelry. It just so happens that Deku, Todoroki, and Bakugo run into the jewel thieves, prompting Deku to chase after Rhodey. We get this slapstick-filled chase scene, which sure, it's fun to watch, but doesn't really make sense if you really think about it. Like, how is this regular-ass dude able to run away from Deku? You know, the same Deku who runs faster than a subway train 5 seconds later. However, while this chase scene is happening, another chase is also happening. A man who escaped from Humorize with a secret case is being chased by this cool archer lady. I'm gonna keep calling her cool archer lady because no one actually ever says her name. She catches up to the escapee by blowing up his car, causing the case to fall out, and coincidentally land next to Rhodey, who mixes up the cases by accident. When cool archer lady realizes she got the wrong case, she begins hunting down Deku and Rhodey. However, in addition to cool archer lady, Humorize has paid off the local police to hunt down Deku and Rhodey. They run away in a really well animated chase scene that is full of these dynamic sweeping camera angles. Once they finally lose the pursuers, the police put out a notice that Deku is now on their most wanted list as he's being accused of mass murder.
That image is still so funny.
In response, Deku and Rhodey decide to go off the grid and trek out to a neighboring country out of the police's jurisdiction. From here, the film morphs into a buddy adventure about Deku and Rhodey traveling as we learn more about his backstory and his friendship with Deku deepens. Along the way, Deku sends a coded message to Todoroki about where they're headed, prompting him and Bakugo to head out to meet them. Everyone collides as Deku and Rhodey are met by cool archer lady and another Humorized lackey, but Todoroki and Bakugo show up at the same time and help fight them off. And we get this absolutely crazy one-shot action sequence. The animation in this film is just spectacular. After fending off their attackers, the trio and Rhodey meet up, where Todoroki and Bakugo inform Deku and Rhodey that they're carrying a Humorized case, which they open up a secret compartment and find a device. It turns out that this device is actually a key that was programmed by Rhodey's father to stop the trigger bombs. As it turns out, when Rhodey was a child, his father seemingly abandoned him and his siblings to join Humorize, but he was actually kidnapped and forced to work on the trigger bomb. And in a Rogue One-esque sabotage, he programmed a way to stop the bomb. However, at the same time, Humorize announces that they're going to be triggering the bomb soon and gives everyone an advanced warning.
For the sake of an equal chance at stopping him. Why does this guy care about giving the people he wants to eradicate a fair shot at stopping him?
Regardless, the heroes spring into action, attacking the Humorized bases across the world, while Sudeku, Bakugo, and Todoroki attack the main headquarters, hoping to use the key to disable all of the bombs. As part of the attack, the trio split up, with Todoroki and Bakugo fighting their own battles against some of Humorize's goons.
And for some reason, Humorize just has a bunch of quirk users working for them, even though, their whole shtick is that they hate quirks. They try to explain it away by saying that the quirk users in Humorize are just there for a guaranteed spot in the new world, but just wasting all the potential that could have come with a quirkless threat.
The Bakugo and Todoroki fights are pretty cool to watch, and are, of course, well animated, but the villains they face are much less interesting than in Heroes Rising. Deku takes on Fleck Turn, where we finally learn some more about this guy. As it turns out, Fleck Turn has a quirk that reflects everything he touches, and because of it, when he was growing up, he never felt any physical touch or intimacy. He even tried to himself, but his quirk wouldn't allow it, so he decided to use his hatred for the world to start Humorize in hopes of ridding the world of quirks.
It's a unique backstory, I'll give you that.
I always like the villain backstories in My Hero Academia that are a result of a quirk such as Toga's, and I think this one is alright. It's a little lame though. I want to hear more about the quirk Doomsday Theory, but we just don't get that. Fleck Turn overpowers Deku, whose attacks keep getting reflected back at him. He also gets incapacitated after being shot by a laser under Fleck Turn's control. All hope seems to be lost until Rhodey shows up and offers the deactivation device to Fleck Turn. However, this is a distraction, giving Deku the chance to get up and attack Fleck, with Rhodey running away, getting hit in the process, but pressing on to deactivate the bomb. Deku faces Fleck Turn again, where we get this film's crazy third act animation. Deku decides to launch a barrage of 100% powered punches so fast and so powerful that it overpowers Fleck Turn's reflection quirk. He calls it the United States of World Smash.
Yeah, okay.
After defeating Fleck Turn, Deku rushes to find Rhodey, who has deactivated the bombs, and even after suffering a fatal hit, is still alive.
And that is World Heroes Mission. There are a lot of cool ideas here, but most of them are just not executed well or not executed at all.
Positives first, I like Rhodey. He's probably the most fleshed out original character so far, and seeing his developing dynamic with Deku was fun. The animation is great like always. While I don't think the final fight was as grand or emotional as the first two films, this one was consistently well animated throughout the whole film, just like Heroes Rising. I can't stop thinking about that nuts one-shot scene or that bridge chase scene. I like the villain's plot. The quirk Doomsday Theory was always a really cool concept in the source material, and to see a group of villains base their ideology off of it helps with the world building. Now the negatives. While I like the concept of the villain's plan, in action it's kind of stupid. Their cult is full of quirk users, even though they supposedly have a vendetta against quirk users. Fleck Turn, while more fleshed out than Wolfram, still isn't comparable to a character like Nine, who's much more intimidating and believable. It's called World Heroes Mission, but doesn't feel like a World Heroes Mission. We see the other country's heroes for what, like 5 seconds? There's a montage of them fighting goons and that's about it. I like some of their designs too, like that Pharaoh guy is pretty funny, and yet they do nothing. And there aren't even a lot of landmarks either. The main trio travel to 2 fictional countries and that's it. It's no globe-trotting adventure. The whole framed for mass murder subplot goes literally nowhere. There's a lot of potential there, but they just do nothing with it and completely dismiss it halfway through the movie. Same with the new costume designs. We see them for one scene in the beginning and then never again. What was the point of hyping them up in the marketing just to never use them? The side characters have nothing to do. Deku and Rhodey get the most screen time and do the most. Todoroki and Bakugo are there and do get their own fights, but they honestly just feel like afterthoughts. And the rest of the class, they're most definitely shoehorned in because they do practically nothing. We get one montage of them fighting faceless enemies and that's it. Heroes Rising did it so well, where every student played a part in taking down the main villains who had been hyped up throughout the entire film. Here, Todoroki and Bakugo fight villains who show up for the very first time in their respective fights, and the rest of the class just fights fodder. You could take out their contributions here and nothing would change. And finally, the final fight, while cool to watch, just doesn't hold the emotional weight of the first 2 films. Two Heroes was about Deku and All Might fighting side by side to prove to David that even when All Might retires, there'll still be new heroes to take his place. Heroes Rising was an important fight showcasing the self-sacrificial nature of Deku and how he was willing to give up one for all, give up on his dream, in order to protect the island and defeat Nine. What does World Heroes Mission do? It tells us that Deku doesn't give up.
What really gets me about this film was that there was so much potential. We could have gotten a history of the quirk Doomsday Theory and how people react to it in the modern day. We could have gotten a glimpse into the other countries in the My Hero Academia world and see how their hero culture differs from Japan's. And we could have seen Deku, Todoroki, and Bakugo in badass costumes for the entire film, but no.
One of the more egregious problems with this film is that the production schedule of it hurt the main series. World Heroes Mission, released while season Season 5 was airing, and to coincide with the film, they swapped the order of the arcs in the manga, which ruined one of the best arcs from the manga, that being My Villain Academia. Not only did the reorder of events hurt the payoff of that arc and mean that the arc was rushed and cut content, but the usual animation quality shenanigans popped up again, and this season took a major hit because Bones was pouring more resources into the film than the actual series.
At this point, I'm just really hoping Heroes Rising wasn't a fluke, and that this next film can capture that same level of quality and emotional highs.
The fourth and final My Hero Academia movie is You're Next, which released in Japan on August 2nd, 2024, and in North America on October 11th. While it didn't earn as much as World Heroes Mission, it still performed as well as the first two films, grossing over $32 million worldwide. It also continues the trend of receiving generally okay scores, with a 7 out of 10 on IMDb and a 3.3 out of 5 on Letterboxd.
I'd say it has a lot in common with World Heroes Mission. Its animation is great, we get some interesting new side characters, but there's a lot of wasted potential here, and it ultimately ends up as a pretty bland product.
The big draw with this film was the new original villain known as Dark Might, a twisted and evil version of the symbol of peace, a villain who corrupts what it means to be a symbol.
I really like this idea, a villain twisting around the symbol of peace. I really wonder how they're going to explore this throughout the film. They don't.
The basic premise here is that a man claiming to be the new symbol of peace shows up and summons a giant moving fortress, pulling in all surrounding citizens. Class A gets dragged inside and must find a way to escape and save the trapped civilians before Dark Might can take over the world.
What's really funny to me about this is that this supposedly takes place in the middle of a war.
The film takes place in the midst of Season 7, specifically after the UA Trader arc and before the Final War arc. There are 4 days between when the Trader is revealed and the Final War starts. During this time, the heroes prepare their plan of attack.
And also during these 4 days, they apparently have time for a full-on side adventure. Sure.
The film opens introducing our villain who is watching a recording of All Might's final battle against All for One. His walls are plastered with photos of All Might, and as All Might points out, declaring it's your turn, the man takes it as a direct request to him, proudly stating that he will be the next symbol of peace.
This is such a cool idea, and they do nothing with it.
This obsession reminds me of the Riddler from the Batman, a deranged sociopath who believes that he is working with their favorite hero, but ultimately twists their morals around to benefit themselves. It could also be a really cool exploration as a dark mirror to Deku, someone who took their obsession with All Might and becoming a hero too far. So far, they take drastic, dark measures.
No, none of that.
But I'm getting ahead of myself. We next join the students as they cruise around the now war-torn city, taking on a group of escaped criminals from Tartarus. While many citizens have begun arming themselves in response to a lack of trust in heroes, one man calmly sits by himself, pouring himself tea and just looking pretty cool. Deku and the class chase down a villain who has kidnapped a woman named Anna. Deku tries to apprehend him, but his quirk gets increasingly more powerful, seemingly when he is touching her. Suddenly, the cool guy from before pulls up and shoots the villain, forcing him to drop her. He then tries to shoot her too, but the bullet is stopped by another man who takes her away as a giant airship arrives, carrying a crew led by the man from before, who now has the appearance of young All Might. While everyone is distracted, the villain runs away, leaving a path of destruction behind, but the All Might lookalike chases after him and defeats him in one punch, before declaring himself as the new All Might, the new symbol of peace. Deku calls him out as a fake hero because he had no regard for the safety of the civilians caught in the debris. He demonstrates his power by hacking into all major networks and declaring that he is there to save Japan from the state it now finds itself in. He then touches Anna, which amplifies his quirk, and he uses his powers to create a giant fortress which drags everyone nearby inside, including Class A.
It's an alright introduction, even if it's pretty unbelievable. You're telling me that this giant fortress just happens to attack with all these villains, and no one mentions it at all in the canon, even though this supposedly takes place like a day before the Final War?
Now inside his new fortress, Fake Might calls up All Might and has a chat about how his Your Next moment inspired him, that when he saw the state of Japan he couldn't just sit idly by, he needed to use his strength and power to save everyone. All Might responds telling him to release the captured civilians, and Fake Might is like, nah, I need them bro. And All Might is like, you're no hero, I already have a successor, it's Class A and they're gonna beat your ass. And then Fake Might is like, fine, I am now Dark Might, and I'm gonna test your so-called successors.
This is as far as the Twisted Symbol of Peace storyline goes.
From here on out, Dark Might is kind of just a generic villain. He wants to gain more power and use it to take over the world under the guise of saving it. He doesn't even have a twisted sense of justice, he's just power hungry, but that's it. He sends his lackeys out to test Class A, but has them all enhance their powers first using Anna. Deku gets separated from his class and meets the cool guy from before named Julio, who helps him fend off a squad of Dark Might's goons. Julio is reluctant to help Deku, but but they travel together in search of a villain who's canceling Deku's quirk. They find him and defeat them when Dark Might reveals himself. Deku tries to attack, but is effortlessly defeated using Baloney Smash, cool name there, who then offers for Deku to attack him again sometime. In the meantime, Todoroki and some other members of Class A stumble into a town where the villain Deborah and Anna are testing Anna's quirk on a number of civilians. They go to stop them, but are stopped by Deborah, who traps them all in dreams. At the same time, Bakugo and his team get tested by an army of monsters and effortlessly defeat them.
Yeah, this team doesn't really do much.
Deku and Julio eventually pull up to the town square and are also trapped by Deborah, except One For All allows Deku to break out. He calls out to Julio, whose prosthetic eye and arm are able to aim and shoot Deborah, breaking her control over everyone. Instantly, Julio tries to shoot Anna, but Deku stops him, giving the villains time to take Anna away. Julio gets mad at Deku and explains their backstory. In the past, Julio was hired as a butler for a wealthy family. His quirk can neutralize other quirks using his right hand, and was hired to watch over Anna, whose quirk can amplify the quirk of anyone she's compatible with, but if someone isn't compatible, then it brings them and her immense pain. Over time, Julia was able to help her lead a normal yet secluded life, but her quirk kept getting stronger, to the point where it was hard for him to suppress. She made him promise that if it ever got too powerful, then he should kill her, which she agrees to. However, the family is attacked by a powerful mafia family, the same group led by Dark Might, who kidnap her for her quirk and kill the rest of the family, leaving only Julio alive with a missing eye and a missing hand, rendering his quirk useless. He vows to end Anna's suffering in order to stop it from getting out of control and ending the world. I'm not a huge fan of giant exposition dumps, but I honestly like the conflict here. Yes, we've gotten the powerful quirk out of control storyline before, but I think the conflict that Julio faces of whether to kill Anna to end her suffering is neat and not something really explored in My Hero Academia yet. However, we get a pretty sappy monologue from Deku and the rest of the class about how they're not going to let anyone die, how they're going to work together to find a solution.
I like Julio, but this whole conflict is resolved in like 5 minutes.
Dark Might decides that since the heroes and civilians won't bow to him, he will kill all of Japan's remaining heroes so that he will be the only one left to rely on, and as his fortress heads towards UA's base, they organize a group of heroes to protect it. However, even with a full blast from Endeavor, they're unable to destroy the fortress and must stall until Class A can stop it from the inside. Most of Class A starts to evacuate civilians with the help of Mirio, who slipped inside, whilst Deku, Bakugo, Todoroki, Tokoyami, and Julio head after Dark Might. Along the way, exactly what you expect to happen happens. Class A has to fight an army of faceless fodder, while Bakugo, Todoroki, and Tokoyami get left behind to fight some of Dark Might's lackeys. Their fights aren't nearly as entertaining or well thought out as in World Heroes Mission and Heroes Rising. Deku and Julio eventually reach Dark Might, who overwhelms him with his alchemy quirk, which is just crazy overpowered. It allows him to transmute any object into almost anything else. Eventually, Todoroki and Bakugo catch up and help Deku fight Dark Might, who becomes even more powerful after using Anna's quirk once again. The three team up and use their combined strength to overpower Dark Might and defeat him. However, Anna's quirk becomes too powerful and activates once again, turning Dark Might into an uncontrollable monster. Todoroki and Bakugo must hold him back, while Deku helps Julia reach Anna. Her quirk activates on Julio, enhancing his own neutralization quirk, allowing him to deactivate her quirk.
Wait, so you're telling me this whole time Anna's quirk was compatible with Julio's, and they just didn't try it for whatever reason?
Anyways, once his form weakens, the trio team up with their most powerful moves, and Deku finishes him off with an insane dropkick, crazy animation, and flying chunks of debris like usual. Afterwards, it turns out Julia's buffed quirk was strong enough to just erase Anna's quirk entirely, and they never tried this before because there was a slim chance that it would have worked. Dude, I actually wrote quirked in the script. I'm losing my mind.
Like with World Heroes Mission, there are a lot of cool ideas and concepts at play here, but they're either just not fully explored or they're resolved in seconds.
I like the idea of the villain twisting around the idea of a symbol of peace and going too far in pursuit of justice and security, but the idea is just dropped almost immediately. Dark Might isn't some dark reflection of All Might, he's just a generic villain who wants to take over the world, who happens to be obsessed with the strength of All Might. I'm gonna bring this up again because it's my favorite movie, but look at the dynamic of the Riddler and Batman. You have a villain who obsesses over Batman's harsh sense of justice and feels seen in his pursuit of vengeance, so much so that he takes matters into his own hands, hoping to follow in his idol's footsteps, only to take away the wrong lesson and commit heinous crimes to fit his warped sense of morality. That would have been a really cool dynamic to explore in this film. Dark Might obsesses over the idea of peace through strength, and kills villains with no care for collateral damage. We get glimpses of this idea, but then it's dropped 5 minutes later after All Might gets mad at him for it. Another bit of wasted potential is Julio. I like his backstory and his resolve, but this inner conflict of whether to kill Anna to end her suffering is also dropped 5 minutes after it's finally acknowledged. Sure, we get hints of it at the beginning, but after Lord dumping the reasoning for his actions, Deku is just like, bro, we'll just find another way to stop her quirk, it's all good. And then Julio is just cool with it, and that other way that they found could have been done the entire time. There's, what,
too stupid to think of it earlier. And again, like World Heroes Mission, the side characters really don't do much. I'm glad Todoroki and Bakugo actually played a part in the main villain's defeat, that was really cool, but up to that point they didn't do much. They honestly played a larger role in World Heroes Mission, and clearly had a large role in Heroes Rising. The rest of the class is also just left out to dry too, being relegated to holding off an army of faceless monsters just like in 2 Heroes. So what was the positive? The animation was good like always, the final battle was neat, and I guess Julia was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's about it. I'd argue this is probably the weakest film out of all 4 of them.
Which leads me to my final rankings. Let's start from the bottom and work our way up. Like I said, Your Next is my personal least favorite. It had a lot of cool ideas, but they just weren't explored in any meaningful ways. The sidecast doesn't do much, and the villain is pretty lackluster. It also just feels the most out of place and forced, trying to cram it into the middle of the final war arc. It was honestly really close for me with these next 2, but in 3rd place is 2 Heroes. It's easily a step up from Your Next. I like the original characters more. Getting to see some of All Might's backstory is a really nice inclusion, and that payoff in the end, having All Might and Deku fighting side by side, was a great finale. But between the incredibly lame villains, shoehorning in the rest of the class just to do absolutely nothing, and the draining and unnecessary exposition dumps, it takes 3rd place. As the first film in the franchise, it was clearly trying to find its footing, and it suffers because of that. In 2nd place, barely passing 2 Heroes, is World Heroes Mission. It definitely has its flaws, like its wasted potential in terms of costumes, overall concept, and villains, but also has its own positives too. I'd argue even though the rest of the class does nothing and exists as simply background characters, the increased focus on Todoroki and Bakugo is better done than in 2 Heroes. Rhodey's also a more compelling side character than David and Melissa were in 2 Heroes, and I think the final battle in 2 Heroes is better than in this film, but World Heroes Mission had consistently stronger animation and more action set pieces that existed on a much grander scale. And finally, in 1st place, to no one's surprise, is Heroes Rising. It's not a perfect film by any means, it has its flaws like the ass-pull ending, but it does a lot of things right that other films fail to do. Nine and his crew feel like real intimidating villains. Their backstories are nothing crazy, but they feel like a genuine threat and have really cool designs. They're also utilized very well, incorporating a number of well-animated fight scenes that give every student from Class A something to do. The original side characters aren't the best, but the dynamic between Katsuma and Deku is very endearing, and honestly, they don't have to carry the film here. I like seeing the strength and dynamic between Deku and Bakugo. It's something that doesn't just feel like filler, non-canon spin-off. It feels like the payoff of their growing rivalry and friendship from the main series. And the final battle is easily the best out of all these films. The animation is crazy, coupled with the beautiful music, and the writing tops it all off. I love seeing the self-sacrificial nature of Deku, who's willing to give up his quirk to save the island and stop Nine. The other films just never really hit that deep, often boiling down to the same generic idea of don't give up. But in the end, if you like My Hero Academia, you'll still find enjoyment in each and every one of these films, but the only one that I can actually see standing on its own is Heroes Rising. If you've never seen the original series, I can still see you getting some enjoyment out of that one.
You know, I may have had a lot of problems with these films, but it was still a fun time to revisit some of them and check out the ones I hadn't even seen yet. You know, maybe we'll do this with the Naruto movies next. I wonder how many there are. Maybe not.